Derrick Slate stared at the glowing drink in his hand, skeptical. The neon blue liquid looked strange, almost radioactive. He was beginning to wonder if it was the drink that had caused him to hallucinate or if the bizarre situation unfolding in front of him was actually real. There was no way he could be witnessing this. A towering 7-foot-tall woman with glowing violet skin, wielding a sword of shimmering energy, engaged in a brutal fight against a creature that seemed like something out of a nightmare. And now witnessed the sacred combat. The announcer's voice boomed across the arena, his voice amplified and filled with dramatic flair. Derrick rubbed his temples, still suffering from the after-effects of last night's wild party. The hangover wasn't helping. "Hey, you're blocking the view," someone grumbled from behind him. Derrick shifted awkwardly, still struggling to process how his dream vacation to explore the galaxy had somehow landed him in the middle of an alien gladiator tournament on a remote planet named Zarna 6. The warrior woman, Kira Nix, as the holographic display above the arena called her, was a force of nature. She moved with deadly grace, her long silver hair sparkling under the light of the planet's twin moons, creating an almost ethereal glow. Her battle armor left little to the imagination, showcasing a body sculpted by the gods themselves, all sharp angles and flawless curves. For 3,000 cycles, the warriors of Zarna 6 have proven their worth through combat, the announcer continued as the crowd roared in anticipation. Today, Kira Nix of the Starclaw tribe faces the ultimate challenge. Derrick took another sip of his drink, muttering under his breath, "Sure, because nothing says vacation like watching alien gladiators fight for their lives." The creature she was battling, however, looked like it had been pulled from the darkest corners of a twisted geneticist's nightmares. A horrifying chimeric beast, covered in scales, teeth, and claws, it let out a roar that reverberated through the stadium, sending shivers down Derrick's spine. "That's a grade 7 Titan beast," a nearby spectator whispered in awe. "They engineered it specifically for this ritual. No one's ever defeated one alone." "Great," Derrick muttered, rolling his eyes. Because regular monsters weren't dramatic enough? The battle began with a fury, Kira moving faster than Derrick could follow. Her sword crackled with energy, slicing through the air as she narrowly dodged the Titan's savage strikes. Even from his untrained viewpoint, Derrick could see the fight was far from one-sided. The beast was fast, too fast, and it appeared to anticipate her every move. "The beast is enhanced with combat data from 1,000 warriors," a voice explained nearby, catching Derrick's attention. "It learns and adapts to any style. It's almost unbeatable." "That's cheating," Derrick muttered, his mind starting to work. "If it's using an algorithm to predict her moves, there has to be a pattern. There's always a flaw." As Kira barely avoided another crushing strike, her blade clattering to the ground and landing far from her reach, Derrick's mind raced. He could see the rhythm in the beast's movements. It struck 3 times, paused to recalibrate, then repeated. "Classic loop structure," he murmured, eyes narrowing. "If someone could just throw it off." Frustrated, Derrick crushed his empty energy drink can in his hand and tossed it toward a nearby recycling unit. Of course, his aim was terrible. The can missed the unit, bounced off a decorative pillar, ricocheted off the arena wall, and, unbelievably, struck the Titan beast directly in the neural control node at the base of its skull. The beast froze mid-attack, its glowing eyes flickering erratically as it stood stock still. Then, with a sudden jerk, it collapsed to the ground with all the grace of a malfunctioning robot. The stadium went completely silent. Derrick, still holding his hand out from the throw, slowly lowered it. My bad." The silence was shattered by an eruption of noise as the crowd went wild, shouting and cheering in a cacophony of alien languages. Derrick's universal translator could barely keep up, but one phrase kept repeating clearly, "The champion has risen." Kira stood still, her violet eyes locking onto Derrick with an intensity that made him feel like he'd just been caught doing something terribly wrong. She moved toward him with slow, deliberate steps, each one calculated and predatory. "You," she said, her voice melodic, almost otherworldly in its musical quality. The translator struggled to capture the nuance, but Derrick could feel the weight of her gaze. "You have claimed victory in the sacred combat?" Derrick raised his hands defensively, looking completely out of his element. "Look, I was just trying to recycle. I'm really big on environmental responsibility, even on alien planets." Kira ignored him, her gaze still unwavering as she closed the distance. Up close, she was even more striking, elegantly powerful, nearly a foot taller than him, her features a blend of fierce beauty and warrior grace. "You have defeated the Titan beast," she said, her tone now carrying the weight of ancient laws. "By the sacred laws of Zarna 6, You have proven yourself worthy. Worthy of what exactly? Derrick stammered, his voice cracking slightly. Having a towering, beautiful alien woman stare at him like he was both her prey and her puzzle was not something he'd expected when he booked this vacation. Kira smiled, the intensity in her eyes shifting. You have claimed your mate? Derrick's heart skipped a beat. This was definitely not what he signed up for. Chapter 2, The Sacred Bond. Derrick stood frozen, staring at Kira, his mind scrambling to catch up with what had just happened. Mate? He could barely process the words. He hadn't come to Zarna 6 for any kind of romantic entanglement, especially not with an alien gladiator who could probably snap him in half with one hand. Wait, what? Derrick finally managed, his voice cracking as if it had betrayed him. No, you've got it wrong. I was just trying to get rid of that drink can. I didn't mean to win anything. Kira's smile only deepened, her violet eyes glinting with something ancient and unyielding. Her posture was regal, her presence overwhelming. Derrick felt small in comparison, as if the very air around her was charged with power. The victory was not by your hand, but by fate, she said, her voice calm, almost serene, but with a sharp undertone. You have proven yourself worthy by the sacred laws of Zarna 6. By defeating the Titan beast, you have claimed me as your mate. Derrick blinked rapidly, trying to piece this together. Wait, you're saying? I just got you by throwing a can? I didn't even fight anything. You acted with the heart of a true warrior, Kira responded, taking a step closer to him. Her tall frame loomed over him, but there was a softness in her gaze now, something far less intimidating. The law of Zarna 6 is clear. You may not have raised a weapon, but you fought with wisdom. The ancient bond between our species allows for only one mate. The one who defeats the Titan beast in sacred combat is bound to the victor, whether by the blade or by fate. Derrick was starting to sweat, not because of the heat of the arena, but because of the sudden weight of everything around him. This couldn't be happening. There had to be some misunderstanding. He didn't even know what the heck a Titan beast was, let alone how to fight one. And yet here he was, being told he was now tied to this fierce, magnificent woman who, for all intents and purposes, looked like she could end his life on a whim. You can't be serious, he stammered, looking around at the growing excitement of the crowd. I'm just some guy. I don't belong in some alien love ritual. Kira's expression softened, but there was a flicker of something else behind her eyes. It wasn't pity, but something far more intense. She leaned in closer, her voice lowering to a whisper just for him. You belong more than you know. In the ways of my people, this, she gestured to herself, to the arena, to the crowd that was still cheering in the distance, is how a bond is forged. I have been chosen as your mate, and I, too, accept you. Derrick's thoughts were a blur, but one thing was becoming painfully clear. The laws of this planet were not going to be easy to escape. And despite all his confusion, there was something undeniably powerful about the connection that seemed to have been made between them, something that stirred deep in his gut, just below the panic. Okay, but what does that mean exactly? Derrick asked, his voice quieter now, almost fearful of the answer. Kira tilted her head slightly, considering him. It means that I am bound to you as you are to me. We will live together, fight together, and share a bond like no other. And the universe will recognize us. Derrick blinked. Wait, we live together? Fight together? You mean, we're like a team? In everything? The air between them seemed to crackle with the enormity of the words. Yes, a partnership. A union stronger than any of your earthly bonds. Our species are not meant to be divided, Derrick Slate. We are made to share everything, to strengthen each other with our gifts. Derrick felt a deep sense of discomfort at the thought of being tied to a warrior for the rest of his life. He had never signed up for that kind of commitment. He hadn't even signed up for this. This wasn't a vacation. This was something else entirely. He was out of his depth. And if I say no? He asked, unable to stop himself. Kira's eyes narrowed, her expression shifting. There is no no in the ways of the bond. Your refusal is impossible. The sacred law cannot be undone. Derrick ran a hand through his hair, his mind still in shock. So, I'm stuck with you now? Stuck. Kira's lips curled slightly, a knowing smile playing at the corners. No, you are not stuck. You are chosen. And I, too, have chosen you. Before Derrick could respond, the loudspeaker crackled again, and the announcer's voice boomed, and now the champion will be honored in the sacred arena. Let the bond ceremony commence. The crowd cheered wildly, but Derrick was still processing. A ceremony? What the hell kind of ceremony? He felt the weight of 1,000 eyes on him as Kira took his hand and pulled him forward. Come, she said softly. You will understand soon enough. The arena's atmosphere shifted. The cheering faded into the background and suddenly, everything felt intensely personal. Kira led Derrick to the center of the battleground, where an altar stood, made of glowing stone, its surface etched with intricate symbols. Here, she said, guiding him to kneel before the altar, the bond will be sealed. And your life as mine will change forever. Derrick stared at the glowing altar, unsure whether to feel honored or terrified. Either way, he wasn't getting out of this, not without risking the wrath of an entire planet. All right, let's get this over with, Derrick muttered, trying to calm his racing thoughts. Kira looked down at him, her expression unreadable for a moment, before she knelt beside him. The light from the altar flickered and pulsed as if waiting for something. Derrick could feel the heat of Kira's body next to his, the power that radiated from her. She took his hand again, and this time, Derrick didn't pull away. The words were spoken in an ancient alien tongue, ritualistic and deep, before the light surged brighter, enveloping them both in a sacred glow. A sudden, powerful feeling shot through Derrick's chest, like the very heart of Zarna 6 had just recognized him. And as the light pulsed once more, he felt it. The bond. A connection deeper than he could have ever imagined, stronger than any force he'd ever known. And as the ceremony concluded, Kira's eyes locked onto his, and he understood. This was no longer just a random vacation. His life as he knew it had just changed forever. I told you, Derrick, Kira whispered, her voice a soft promise. You're mine now. Chapter 3. The Bond Unraveling. Derrick was no longer sure where the ceremony ended and reality began. The light had faded, leaving him breathless and slightly disoriented. He blinked, still kneeling in the center of the arena, as the echoes of the crowd began to return to his senses. They were still chanting and shouting, though the words were a blur of alien sounds his translator couldn't quite catch. Kira, standing beside him, seemed unaffected by the intensity of the ritual. She looked down at him with a gaze that was both comforting and intimidating. Her presence was commanding, and despite the overwhelming sense of connection between them, Derrick couldn't shake the feeling of being trapped. You okay? Derrick asked, trying to sound casual but failing miserably. Kira gave him a small smile, her eyes flickering with something softer than the fierce intensity she'd shown in the arena. I'm more than fine. This bond strengthens me as it strengthens you. She offered him a hand, and Derrick hesitated only for a moment before taking it. The warmth of her touch was immediate, filling him with an inexplicable surge of energy. He couldn't deny it, it felt right, but that didn't make him feel any less uncomfortable. Yeah, I feel something, all right, Derrick muttered under his breath. But this doesn't exactly feel like a vacation anymore. She chuckled, a soft, melodic sound that made his heart beat a little faster. You have no idea, Derrick. There is much to learn and much to understand. The bond isn't just physical. It connects us in ways you cannot yet comprehend. Yeah, well, Derrick said, his voice tinged with humor that he didn't quite feel. I didn't exactly come here for a life lesson. Kira's smile faltered just slightly, and her expression became more serious. This is not a life lesson. This is destiny. You wanted to argue. You really did. But there was something about her tone, the weight of her words, that made him hesitate. Instead, he shifted his gaze around the arena. The cheering had died down and the crowd was dispersing, some leaving, some heading for nearby halls. Their eyes followed him, some with reverence, others with curiosity. So now what? Derrick asked, still trying to wrap his mind around the situation. What happens after the whole bond thing? Kira stepped closer, her voice low, almost a whisper, as if sharing a secret just for him. Now we begin what you've claimed, Derrick Slate. The sacred bond is not just a title, it is a commitment. To our people, to this world, to our very existence. Derrick stood up slowly, feeling the weight of her words settle in. And what does that mean for me? Do I have to fight gladiator battles now, or? Kira's eyes softened, and she reached out, gently placing a hand on his arm. No, but you will fight beside me. We face everything together now as one. That was the part that unnerved him. Everything. As one. He hadn't signed up for any of this. He was a regular guy who liked hanging out, going to concerts, and traveling the galaxy. He didn't have the skills to be a warrior. He certainly didn't know anything about alien laws and traditions, and the idea of fighting in sacred combat with Kira felt like a fate worse than death. Look, I appreciate the whole destiny thing, but I'm still trying to process this bonding ritual. Are you sure you can't just let me go back home? Derrick asked, his voice almost pleading. Kira's gaze hardened for a moment, her eyes flashing with a depth that made him feel small again. She straightened, her posture regal, commanding. You cannot go back, Derrick. Not now. The bond is sealed. Your fate is tied to mine. And mine to yours. Her voice softened slightly. I did not choose you out of convenience. This bond is sacred. It cannot be undone. Derrick took a deep breath, trying to quell the storm of thoughts racing in his head. He had a million questions. He felt overwhelmed, his mind tangled between the surreal reality of being bonded to an alien warrior and the gnawing fear of what that would mean for the rest of his life. So, what's next? Derrick asked, his voice quieter this time, almost uncertain. Kira studied him for a moment before giving him a slow nod. Now we must return to my clan. The Starclaw tribe will recognize our bond, and you will be accepted as one of us. There are rituals, teachings, and tests that come with the bond. Tests. Derrick repeated, feeling a pang of dread. Yes, the bond must be solidified. It is not enough for us to simply be tied by fate. We must prove ourselves to the tribe, to the elders. To all who will witness this union. He swallowed hard. And what if I fail these tests? Or, I don't know, screw up somehow? Kira's gaze softened again, but there was no denying the seriousness of her words. Failure is not an option, Derrick. But if you are with me, you will not fail. He didn't know whether to feel comforted or more terrified. This was real. This was happening. Kira gave him one last piercing look, then turned and motioned for him to follow. Come, there is much to prepare. We leave at dawn. Derrick hesitated for a moment before nodding. All right, lead the way, I guess. As they walked out of the arena and into the bustling streets of Zarna 6, Derrick felt a gnawing sensation in the pit of his stomach. This was the beginning of something far beyond his control. He couldn't turn back now. The sacred bond had sealed his fate. And Kira, his chosen mate, had already made it clear. There was no escaping it. Chapter 4. Trials of the Starclaw Tribe. The following day dawned with an alien sun burning low over the horizon of Zarna 6, casting long shadows across the rugged landscape. The city of Karan, where the arena stood, was already waking up, its towering spires and glass domes flickering to life as neon signs flickered to full brightness, bathing the streets in electric blues, reds, and purples. The city felt alive, almost as if it were breathing. Derrick stood at the edge of Kira's personal ship, the sleek, metallic craft gleaming under the strange light. It was a far cry from the civilian shuttle he'd taken to get here. The ship felt ancient, yet undeniably advanced, as though it were built with technologies far beyond anything he had ever seen. Are you ready? Kira's voice snapped him from his thoughts, and he turned to find her standing in front of him, her silver hair cascading down her back in intricate waves. Her warrior armor was now replaced by flowing ceremonial robes, the deep purple fabric embroidered with gold threads that sparkled in the sunlight. She was the picture of grace, of power. Derrick could hardly believe that he was with her, bound to her. His thoughts kept circling back to that ancient bond, the promise he had unknowingly made when he threw that ridiculous can. Ready for what exactly? Derrick asked, trying to sound calm but failing miserably. His heart was pounding in his chest. He had no idea what this tribal ceremony would entail, and the thought of it made his stomach do flips. To face the trials of the Starclaw tribe. Kira's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. The trials that will cement your place with me. In our world, a bond between two people isn't just ceremonial, it must be proven, tested, and fought for. Tested? Derrick asked, his voice tight with apprehension. What kind of test? You'll see, Kira said cryptically, stepping up onto the ship's ramp and turning to gesture for him to follow. The test will challenge you in ways you cannot imagine, Derrick. But if you are with me, you will pass. Derrick didn't have time to question her further as the ramp closed behind him. The ship hummed to life, lifting off the ground and soaring through the sky with a speed that took his breath away. He had always imagined space travel as slow and steady. He was wrong. The ship zipped through the atmosphere and beyond, the city shrinking below them until all that remained was the endless expanse of stars and a deep, purple-tinted nebula stretching out before them. The flight lasted for hours. Time seemed to stretch and bend in the ship, and Derrick was left alone with his thoughts. His mind kept returning to the same questions. What the hell am I doing here? How did I end up in a bond with a fierce, beautiful warrior from another planet? Finally, the ship descended toward a mountain range. Towering cliffs rose around them, cutting through the clouds. In the distance, Derrick could see something resembling a fortress, its jagged spires piercing the sky. It looked like something out of an ancient legend, built to withstand the test of time, guarding the secrets of a forgotten age. This is where the trials begin. Kira's voice broke through his thoughts, and the ship touched down gently in an open clearing. The air smelled of fresh pine and the earthy scent of the mountains, a stark contrast to the metallic neon world of Quran. Derrick followed Kira out of the ship and into the cool, crisp air. As he stepped onto the rocky ground, he couldn't help but feel like a fish out of water. Everything around him was alien, literally. And yet, there was something oddly comforting about the vastness of the mountains and the quiet hum of the world that surrounded him. Ahead of them, a large stone archway stood, marking the entrance to the trials. The carvings on the stone were intricate and ancient, with patterns of animals, stars, and unknown symbols etched deep into the surface. The atmosphere felt charged, as if the very air held ancient power. "Is this the part where you tell me I have no choice but to go through with this?" Derrick asked dryly, his nerves fraying. Kira glanced at him with a serious expression. "I would never force you to do anything, Derrick. But you've already chosen this path. The bond is not just mine, it is ours, and it will require both of us to succeed." The words, though spoken calmly, hit Derrick hard. He wasn't just in this for himself anymore. Whether he liked it or not, the bond between them tied his fate to hers. And from the look on Kira's face, she wasn't going to let him back out of it. Taking a deep breath, Derrick nodded. "All right then. Let's get this over with." Kira turned toward the archway, and Derrick followed her, feeling a strange, powerful pull to her. Something deep within him had shifted. Whatever this was, this bond, it was becoming more real with every passing moment. As they approached the archway, a deep voice boomed from within the mountain. "Approach, chosen of the sacred bond, and prove your worth." Derrick froze for a moment, his pulse quickening. "That was unsettling," he muttered. Kira's smile was almost imperceptible, but there was a glint in her eyes. "It is only the beginning." Inside the mountain was a vast cavern, lit by the soft glow of bioluminescent plants. The air was thick with the scent of moss and earth. At the center of the cavern stood a raised platform, surrounded by a ring of elder warriors, each one looking as imposing as Kira had when they first met. On the platform stood a large stone pedestal, and on it was a glowing orb, pulsing with energy. Derrick couldn't take his eyes off of it. The orb was warm, almost inviting. "This is the trial of strength," Kira explained, her voice serious now. "You must prove your physical and mental fortitude. You will face a challenge that will test your body's endurance, your mind's resilience, and your heart's resolve." Derrick took a slow, steadying breath. He'd faced some tough situations before. Nothing like this, of course, but he wasn't about to back down now. The bond with Kira was too real, too powerful to ignore. He took one last glance at Kira, who stood proudly by his side, and nodded. "I'm ready." And with that, the first trial began. Chapter 5. The Trial of Strength. The cavern was quiet, save for the low hum of energy emanating from the glowing orb that sat upon the pedestal in front of Derrick. As the soft glow bathed the platform, Derrick could feel the weight of the moment settling upon him. The air around him seemed to thicken, and the distant murmurs of the elder warriors faded, their attention now fully focused on him. Kira stood beside him, her presence like a steadying force, yet her eyes were filled with something else, expectation, pride, and perhaps even a little bit of warning. This trial would define him. He had no idea what it would entail, but the weight of her gaze reminded him that his actions here would not only determine his future but would also bind him to her forever. "Focus," Kira whispered, her voice low but firm. "This trial is not just physical. It will test your willpower, your ability to push beyond your limits. You must succeed, Derrick. For both of us." He nodded, swallowing hard as he stepped forward. His muscles tensed, his every instinct screaming at him to run. But there was no turning back now. He had already chosen this path, and with the bond between him and Kira, he had no choice but to walk it. The deep voice that had spoken earlier boomed again, filling the cavern with its power. "The trial of strength begins now." Suddenly, the ground beneath Derrick's feet began to shift. The stone platform rumbled as the glowing orb on the pedestal flickered, then expanded outward in a circle. The light grew brighter, casting long shadows across the cavern, and Derrick's heart raced as the temperature seemed to rise. "What's happening?" he asked, turning to Kira, his voice laced with uncertainty. Kira didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped back, her eyes locked on the pedestal. "You will see," she said quietly, a slight tension in her voice. Without warning, the ground before Derrick cracked open, and from the fissures emerged massive stone golems. Their limbs were thick, like pillars of rock, their bodies heavy and imposing. They lumbered toward him with a slow, deliberate pace, their glowing eyes locked onto him like predators zeroing in on their prey. Derrick's eyes widened as the golems advanced. Each one was at least 7 feet tall, their rocky skin giving off a faint glow as they moved. The air around him grew heavy, and the ground beneath his feet vibrated with the weight of their steps. "You must defeat the Guardians to prove your strength," the booming voice echoed again, this time clearer. "Only then will you be worthy of the bond's full power." Derrick's heart pounded in his chest. He didn't know how to fight stone giants. Hell, he didn't even know how to fight at all. He glanced at Kira, who remained unmoved, her expression unreadable. "Remember the bond," Kira's voice whispered, though it felt like a force more than words. "The bond will guide you." He didn't have time to ponder what she meant. The golems were upon him. The first one swung its massive fist toward him, and Derrick instinctively ducked, feeling the rush of air as the stone hand swept over his head. The force of the swing sent a shockwave through the ground, almost knocking him off balance. Holy! Derrick barely managed to jump out of the way as another fist came crashing toward him. He scrambled back, his breath coming in short bursts, and his mind raced for any kind of plan. There was no time to think. The second golem lunged, swinging its arm toward him like a wrecking ball. Derrick managed to dodge to the side, the stone fist hitting the ground with an earth-shattering thud, cracking the stone beneath him. His pulse raced as he stumbled backward. His body screamed with exhaustion already, but he couldn't afford to stop. Not when the trial had just begun. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Kira standing at the edge of the platform, her posture perfect, her eyes never leaving him. She was waiting. Watching. "Come on, Derrick," he muttered to himself, forcing his legs to move. "You can do this." One of the golems lunged at him again, this time bringing both arms down in a crushing motion. Derrick leapt sideways, narrowly avoiding being flattened. His body slammed into the side of the platform, the impact knocking the breath out of him. He gritted his teeth. This wasn't just about physical strength. It was about endurance, willpower. And he had something none of these stone giants had: determination. "Remember the bond." Kira's words echoed in his mind, and suddenly he understood. This wasn't just a test of his body, it was a test of his connection to her, of their shared strength. Derrick closed his eyes for a moment, focusing. He let the bond between them settle, feeling the surge of energy coursing through him. The connection was alive, flowing between them like an invisible current. He could feel her presence, her strength, anchoring him. When his eyes snapped open, he was no longer just Derrick Slate. He was a part of something greater. He was bound to Kira, and through her he was connected to the very heart of Zarna 6. The first golem came at him again, but this time, Derrick didn't dodge. He didn't flee. He stood his ground, his body moving with the flow of the bond, using its energy to guide his every motion. With a roar, the golem swung its massive fist toward him, but Derrick stepped to the side, his body moving with fluid precision. He grabbed the golem's arm as it passed, using the momentum to twist it off balance. With a grunt, he shoved, sending the golem stumbling forward. Before it could regain its footing, Derrick sprinted toward it, launching himself at its back. He climbed the stone giant's body, using the energy from the bond to fuel his strength. With a determined grunt, he reached the back of the golem's neck, where its energy core was located. The soft, pulsing glow there was his target. He didn't hesitate. With a powerful strike, he drove his fist into the core. The golem froze, its entire body locking up as it collapsed to the ground, its energy depleted. Derrick stood panting, his body aching, but a surge of adrenaline shot through him. He'd done it. 1 down, 2 to go. The remaining 2 golems advanced, but this time, Derrick was ready. His body moved with purpose, guided by the bond, every action instinctive and sharp. He was no longer the confused earthling who had stumbled into an alien gladiator fight. He was part of something much bigger. And with every strike, every move, he proved to himself and to Kira that he was worthy of this bond, of this new life he had found with her. The battle raged on, but Derrick knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to lose. Chapter 6, Bound by Fire. The last of the stone golems crumbled to the ground with a deafening crash, its massive form collapsing into a heap of rubble. Derrick stood panting in the center of the platform, sweat pouring down his face, his body bruised and aching. His heart hammered in his chest, and the thrum of energy from the bond with Kira surged through him, giving him the strength to stand tall. The cavern was eerily silent for a moment, the elder warriors watching him with unreadable expressions. Kira stepped forward, her eyes locked on him, intense and filled with something that he couldn't quite decipher. She said nothing as she approached, but Derrick felt her presence wrapping around him, drawing him in. "You did it," she said quietly, her voice carrying both admiration and something deeper, something that stirred something in his chest. Her eyes softened slightly, and she extended her hand toward him. "You've proven yourself, Derrick. You've passed the trial of strength." He nodded, though exhaustion weighed heavily on his shoulders. He could hardly believe what he had just accomplished. He'd faced down 3 massive stone golems and had come out victorious. It wasn't just the physical victory, though. It was the mental, emotional strength that he had called upon, the power of the bond between him and Kira. It was something he hadn't known he was capable of. But the battle wasn't over, not by a long shot. "We still have the final test," Kira said, her voice now steely with determination. "The trial of the flame." Derrick blinked, still catching his breath. "The trial of the flame?" he repeated, his throat dry. "What does that even mean?" Kira's expression didn't shift, but there was a glint in her eye that made him shiver. "It is the test that will prove whether you can truly carry the weight of the bond with me. It is a test of fire, of survival, of your heart and soul. Only those who are worthy can survive it." Derrick swallowed hard. "And if I fail?" "If you fail," she said, her voice cold and unforgiving, "you will be cast out. The bond will break, and you will return to your life without me." The weight of her words hit him harder than anything else had. If he failed, he would lose it all, everything that had changed in the past few days. The bond. Kira. The life he had come to feel was his, however bizarre that seemed. He glanced at the glowing orb on the pedestal, now flickering with an intensity he hadn't noticed before. His instincts screamed that something powerful was about to happen. "Let's get this over with," he muttered under his breath. Kira nodded, then motioned for the elder warriors to step aside. The cavern walls groaned, and the air seemed to shift with an unseen energy, thickening around them. A flame as bright and hot as a star erupted from the center of the cavern floor, shooting upward like a pillar of fire. It was alive, twisting and writhing in the air as it rose higher, higher still, towering over them. Derrick instinctively took a step back, his body tensing at the heat that radiated off the fire. I don't think I can survive that," he muttered. "That's not even a fire. That's—" "The trial of the flame cannot be avoided," Kira interrupted, her voice calm despite the chaos around them. "It is the fire of our ancestors. The fire that tests your soul." Derrick's gaze flicked to her, trying to understand. Her eyes burned with the same fire, the same intensity. This was no mere physical test. It was something deeper, something that would demand every ounce of his being. He had to confront it. Without another word, Kira stepped toward the fire, her silhouette glowing in its light. She didn't hesitate. She didn't flinch. Derrick watched, entranced, as she walked straight into the flames. His breath caught in his throat, panic rising in his chest. No way. But she didn't scream. She didn't burn. The fire parted around her like a living thing, bending to her will as though it recognized her power. Kira moved gracefully through the flames, each step steady, like she belonged there. "You must face it as I do," Kira's voice came to him from the heart of the fire. "The flame will test your heart, your resolve, your soul." Derrick stood frozen for a moment, torn between fear and the strange pull of the bond. He could feel her strength, feel the warmth of the flames as they swirled around him, beckoning him forward. But fear gripped him and doubt clawed at him. Could he survive this? Could he stand beside Kira, bound to her in this way if he failed? The fire beckoned, its tendrils reaching for him, and the overwhelming pull of the bond urged him forward. He stepped into the flames. Pain shot through him, sharp and searing, as the fire wrapped around his limbs like tendrils of pure heat. It burned, but it wasn't the kind of pain that would kill him. It was the kind of pain that made you feel alive. Made you feel every part of yourself. Every fear. Every doubt. Every moment of doubt he'd ever had in his life was pulled to the surface. And then, just as quickly as it had started, the pain began to fade, the fire no longer searing his skin. He opened his eyes and found himself standing in the center of the flames, untouched, as if the fire had never touched him at all. Kira stood before him now, her eyes glowing with that same fire. She smiled, a soft, knowing smile that sent a surge of warmth through his chest. "You have passed, Derrick," she said, her voice gentle now, almost soothing. "You are worthy of the bond." Derrick stood there, still shaking, feeling the heat of the fire in his bones, but now it was no longer painful. It was empowering. "I did it?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Kira nodded, her gaze softening. "Yes, you did. You've proven yourself worthy of the strength of the bond. And now you are mine. Forever." Derrick felt a strange sense of calm wash over him, as though the trials, the pain, and the uncertainty had all led to this moment. The bond was real now, irrevocable. His life was no longer his own, It belonged to Kira, to Zarna 6, to the very fabric of this galaxy that had become his home. And as he reached out to her, their hands meeting in the center of the flame, he understood. This was only the beginning. Together they would face everything that came next. Together they were unstoppable.